Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Successfully in Love podcast. So, with this first episode, I would love to do a quick introduction to who I am and a little bit about my story and how I got here, just so that you really understand who you're listening to and why I do the work that I do, and honestly, why it's so important to me and why I'm so passionate about certain things like working with the root cause of our problems when it comes to our love life, why I'm so passionate about science, and why I love digging into core wounds, attachment work, and gender dynamics. So, without further ado, I'm going to jump right in. And maybe I'll kick off actually by just giving you a bit of a kind of high level life story around all the different things that I experienced growing up and in my life, which some of which might resonate with you, and you might kind of see some parallels that kind of maybe have a bit of a light bulb moment for you. And so, like a lot of go-getting, ambitious professionals, I'm actually an immigrant. I was born in Slovakia, so I'm half Slovakian, half Russian by blood. And I was born in Slovakia. My parents had just moved to Slovakia after leaving Russia, so they were very nomadic and traveling all over the world, trying to kind of find a better life. And when we came to England, it really was this mentality of, we're here, we're in the promised land, we're going to go and achieve, and we're going to go and build our best lives. And that's something that was really like instilled into me from such a young age that, if you put your mind to it, if you want to achieve it, you can go out there and do it. And so both of my parents were busy working. They were busy working and they were busy ultimately achieving. My father was a very international consultant and he was traveling around the world and working on big projects and achieving incredible things in his career. But he was very absent, right? He was very absent. He would come home for maybe a couple of weekends here and there. But really, if I think about it, it was honestly my mother that raised me because he was away so much of the time. And then my mother was also working. She loved her job. She was very passionate about her work, very passionate about having her independence, having her freedom, having her independent financial freedom, and kind of climbing that ladder. And so, kind of understanding it all now, what that childhood really looked like was a little bit, I guess, lonely, because there was a lot of it that was spent, being that foreign immigrant kid in the playground who didn't speak any English, and then coming home and the home being like relatively empty and everyone's just kind of being busy and doing their own things. I did have a brother. I have a brother. He's 10 years older though. And so that kind of that big age gap as well was definitely a factor. And so a lot of my childhood was spent feeling kind of a little bit lonely, right? And this is quite common that I see with a lot of the folks that I work with. This kind of sense of loneliness, often a sense of a lot of responsibility on their shoulders because the parents are busy, or maybe the kids are, at a boarding school, but there's this kind of like loneliness, and I don't want to say like overt abandonment, but this kind of, I guess, like a bit of emotional neglect, right? Because not because anyone's like a bad parent, but just everyone's busy, everyone's out there achieving, everyone's out there doing. And so I had this kind of like lonely childhood, which honestly I didn't really feel at the time, I think, or, I only see it now in retrospect. And with that, I went on to a really good girls' school, a very, very prestigious girls' grammar school in the UK. For those of you in the UK who know, like these are schools that you get into by exams. And so there was a lot of kind of studying and pressure to get into that. And when I got there, I was surrounded by a ton of like high achieving, incredible, incredible women, girls rather. Being in that environment though, definitely triggered the kind of what I know now to be this kind of like not good enough wound. And whilst I was out there achieving all the grades and like, succeeding, I ultimately ended up developing anorexia. And I bring up the anorexia because it's actually a really key part to the story and the work that I do now with clients, specifically because of the techniques that I learned and really what got me started on this personal development journey. And so I developed anorexia, and I didn't even know it was anorexia at the time. Honestly, I just was like, I'm dieting. Everyone's doing the Atkins diet. I'm just dieting. And yeah, so many other women, some other girls rather at the time had anorexia as well. It was really normalized. It was really normalized. It was in the early 2000s. And I don't think anyone really had a language for it apart from maybe a couple of them who were actually hospitalized. But generally it was like, no, you got to be thin. You got to be thin to win. So that was, a very toxic narrative. That being said, The anorexia, what it did do was two things. One, I had chronic insomnia throughout my teens, inevitably because I was malnourished and underfed, but I had horrific insomnia. And that insomnia just was crippling. I mean, I remember I would sleep like maybe 2 or 3 hours a night, and I was doing my GCSEs and then my A levels, and that had a very kind of tangible appearance. So the anorexia never really kind of was that visible because I was naturally a little bit of a curvy kid. And so when I got anorexic, it wasn't like I was, emaciated. I was just thin. And both of my parents couldn't really see it. There wasn't really a language of anorexia back in Eastern Europe, at least. So they didn't really understand it. And I was certainly not one to create drama or create a fuss, right? I was very kind of low key, keep myself to myself. And so when the anorexia was getting really bad and the insomnia started, that's when it became to be a problem because I just wasn't sleeping. And that's when my father and mother decided to start getting help with me. And what that help looked like wasn't going to be traditional therapy. I did a bit of counseling at school, but it was like, how can she solve this problem for herself? Right? Classic high achiever parents. They were like, how can we get this problem solved for her? And at that time, what was really trendy back then, and my father was just getting into that space, was NLP and hypnotherapy. It was like the thing, right? Everyone was doing hypnotherapy, everyone was like doing NLP. And so my father paid for me to do my NLP and hypnotherapy certification. I was 17. I think I was one of Britain's youngest practitioners at the time. And I was, I was so young, but it was in many ways one of the best things that could have possibly happened because I took a week, I think it was 2 weeks. I took 2 weeks off school. I called in sick, sorry, teachers. And I was driving every day. I think it was to Watford. I grew up in Amersham, to Watford. And I was going to this conference center. It's actually where I met one of my best friends. And I was doing intense NLP and hypnotherapy every day, all day. And it was so powerful. I discovered the unconscious mind. I discovered all of this language around it. I discovered all these kind of like incredible processes. And ultimately, I cured my insomnia. I cured it. By the end of the NLP program, the insomnia had gone, and it was pretty miraculous. So by the time I went to university, I remember thinking, I don't want to study. I'm going to become a coach, which is so funny because that was literally 16 years ago or how many years ago. And I began building a little coaching business. And that coaching business was originally helping other students how to get a first-class degree, which is so funny because I was always a bit of a nerd and relentlessly kind of go-getting. So I did that for a while. And then I was like, no, I actually need to study and focus on my grades. Specialized in masculinity. So I did American philosophy and politics and history with English literature and like a whole kind of hodgepodge of a degree, but I specialized in masculinity and kind of and gender theory, which is really fascinating to study, societal conditioning and how is it that we come up with our identities and how is it that we are the way we are. So that was super fascinating. And after uni, I went on this kind of 6-year wine industry career, which is where I became an entrepreneur and I built a business here in Spain. And that was incredibly rewarding. But one thing happened that kind of derailed everything. And that was my parents had a divorce. And really, I say divorce, my father left my mother. And it was unbelievably traumatizing. I was 23 at the time. It was completely out of the blue. I remember when he called me and I thought he was going to tell me that the cat had died. I thought the cat had died. The cat had not died. He was seeing my mother. And it was awful. And my coping mechanism at the time was really, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. Plenty of people get divorced. I'll be fine. Roll my sleeves up and get through it. So I remember throwing myself into my business, being like, I'm just going to go and make money and build this business. My mother completely fell apart. My brother fell apart. Even my father fell apart a little bit. And it felt like I was kind of the responsible one in the family who kind of had to hold it all together and keep everyone together. And it was unbelievably hard. For the time that I was running my business, I was just head down, building, achieving, kind of numbing out now in retrospect. I was also drinking a ton of wine because I worked in the wine industry and it was really fun. And I lived in Ibiza, super fun, but definitely numbing out and distracting. And everything that I knew about like NLP and hypnotherapy was just like out the window. I was doing a bit of therapy, but I wasn't finding it that helpful. And in the end, I had this complete nervous breakdown in Ibiza. And I'll never forget having this like moment where just everything went dark and everything just felt black. And I didn't know who to turn to or what to do. And reaching out to my best friend back in the UK and her telling me, I can't help you with this. This is all a bit too much. And that was just a horrific moment. And so when that happened, that's when I realized I do need help. I need help. And I reached out to my father because you know what? He'd helped me get the NLP and hypnotherapy before. And whilst it hadn't, cured me, quote unquote, it had helped. And so I reached out to him. And at this point, he was deep in the coaching space himself. He always had been really interested in it. And he was actually working as a coach. And he connected me to a woman called Marcy Shimoff. She wrote Happiness for No Reason. And because he was doing some work with her. And he connected me to her. And, we had this conversation. And her conclusion was like, I can't help you. What can help you, though, is the Hoffman process. And so I went to do this at the time, I think it was like an 8-day retreat in Connecticut by the Hoffman process, which honestly saved my life. It was hands down the most powerful thing I could have possibly done at that time. And what it really is about, and they still run it now, it's about untangling the patterns from your parents and learning to forgive them and kind of separate from your parents. So they stop being like parents and they become more like kind of friends. Incredibly powerful work and a completely transformational retreat. And I learned so much there and I transformed so much. And honestly, I view my life as like pre-Hoffman and post-Hoffman. That being said, when I did that process and everything felt like it had transformed for the better, I then moved. I gave up my half of the company here in Spain and I moved to Dubai to help build another company. And when I was in Dubai, it's almost like the protective defensive layer that I had built up around myself had been pulled off by the Hoffman process. And it had revealed this like vulnerable, innocent, pure version of me, which was wonderful, but there was no protection anymore. There was no boundary. There was no there was no protection. And so when I came to Dubai and I was living out there and I was working in the champagne and wine industry, and it was still early days for Dubai, things are really fraught. And in essence, I fell apart. Like I really fell apart. I managed to do about 1.5 years there fine. And then in the second half of the second year, the anorexia came back and I had so many problems at work and problems with my visa and everything was just too much. And I just had a full on, fell apart. And I realize now it's because I was so vulnerable and I didn't have any accountability or support, any kind of structural container after I did this transformational retreat, which is a huge lesson to me and something I really take forward with my clients, and most people I work with. It's like a 6-month container, 3 to 6 month container, but it's like you want to have the time and the support when you're doing deep inner work to feel held, to feel safe, to feel loved, to feel, that you can rest and relax and you're safe. So you can build up your own natural boundaries and protective mechanisms. I didn't have that. And so I came back to the UK eventually after 2 years in Dubai. And at this point, I'd been doing a bit of therapy here and there, and I'd kind of dabbled with a bit of more Hoffman stuff. And I decided to switch gears and switch careers and go into something a little bit more meaningful. Not that wine and champagne is not meaningful, but you know what I mean. And I did a master's degree at Oxford, which I did not think I would get into there. And I specialized in gender dynamics and specifically looking at masculinity and femininity. And this was probably the best thing I could have done for myself at that time, honestly, because not only did I get on a fully funded scholarship, so I ended up having, a sum of money, which I'd actually been saving for my master's degree as cash to invest into coaching and therapy and working on myself and healing myself from anorexia. But I was also studying gender dynamics and I got to study where is it that me and my own femininity as a feminine being had kind of gone wrong? Because really, at least for me, the anorexia was definitely like a very gendered experience. So that was such a transformational year where I spent 9 months just unpacking societal conditioning, societal oppression, gender dynamics, understanding mental health and masculinity and femininity, and really getting my head around it all on a deep granular level and a very kind of academic level, but also on an embodied level, because I was doing so much work on myself. I was doing coaching. I'd got an incredible eating disorder coach who taught me somatic tools and techniques, which were so transformational that they actually healed me, or rather I healed myself, of the anorexia within 9 months, like truly. And those same tools and techniques, the somatic tools, I now teach my clients those very tools and techniques so that they can heal themselves of the core wounds and the core programming that's getting them into relationships that aren't high functioning, that aren't really the relationships that they want and that they deserve. So the same techniques that honestly healed me of anorexia, I now bring to my clients. So that was like an incredibly transformative year. And I look back at Oxford, I'm so grateful. I actually got engaged to my husband. So thank you for that. But yeah, I love that. I love that place. And so many wonderful memories. And so after Oxford, I went back to London and I did a bit of work in philanthropy, working with some founders. So I really got to kind of understand that founder executive mentality, doing philanthropic work. And then I moved to Vancouver to launch an impact investment vehicle. And that was all about working with Syrian refugees and helping them with their kind of mental health, working with women and children. And it was very kind of psychology based, right? So how can we help people integrate? How can we help people like resettle? And as I was building that, two things happened. One, I started burning out because I realized like working in philanthropy is like heavy on the heart and really just like very challenging. I got more and more interested in psychology as a profession. And slowly but surely, I edged my way into the world of behavioral science, which is where I started building my corporate career properly. And I started working for a global behavioral science consultancy, working with people consulting in organizations. So really helping different organizations with their people strategy, like how do you make people happier at work? How do you help people have better relationships at work? How do you help people with anxiety at work? How do you help people with well-being? And all of these kind of different questions. And being kind of a consultant in that space and really studying the behavioral science. And I loved it. I got to do so much training. It was incredible. And parallel to all of that, I was still knee-deep in therapy. I was still knee-deep in all of this work. I had fully discovered coaching and falling in love with it since the anorexia recovery. So I was doing everything from like plant medicine, because I got to live in Vancouver where it's like legal. I got to do plant medicine. I got to do tons of like other modalities. I did like EMDR, I did IFS, I did Hakomi therapy, I did somatic therapy. I'd done CBT till the cows come home, and I wasn't so in love with it, but I did a bit of more of that. I did like feminist narrative therapy and just like all of these different types of therapies. And I was just a sucker and a fiend for it, to be honest. I loved it. So at this point, I was 28, 29, and it was time to kind of settle down, right? So it was time for me to meet the person, meet the one. I had a home, I had a great career that I was climbing the corporate ladder. I had everything kind of ticking away. I had good savings, I had good credit, I had everything working out for me. And I was ready. And I remember telling my best friend, I was like, I'm ready to meet the one. And obviously I've been dating and stuff throughout my 20s, but I've been so nomadic and traveling around in so many different countries that it never really felt realistic. I forgot to mention I lived in Italy as well for a while. So anyhow, wasn't really realistic to have a proper long-term relationship. And so when I got to my late 20s, it was like, now it's time. And I remember getting onto Bumble and meeting the guy, and we had a really lovely picture perfect relationship. I call it almost like Instagram perfect, right? Because we had like so many things in common. We had the same values, we had the same like lifestyle, we loved the same things, and everything was really honestly wonderful. And yet, on a gut level, I wasn't sure if I was with the right person. I felt like I was. I wanted to believe I was. I said yes when we got engaged. We had a big wedding planned and all of this stuff. We bought a property together. And yet, throughout it all, I had this like nagging anxiety of, am I with the right person? I don't know if I'm with the right person. And like most high achievers, I gaslit myself. I really questioned if it's me and maybe I'm self-sabotaging because actually, my parents got divorced and I'm from a pretty dysfunctional background. And, I've had anorexia, so it's probably me. And, I was doing all this therapy and I was trying to dig it out. And I was like, why do I feel so off? Why do I feel so off? Why do I feel so off? And honestly, in retrospect, now I understand I was gaslighting myself. I was denying myself. I was rejecting my own intuition. And at the same time, I did unpack a load of self-sabotage. I unpacked a load of self-sabotaging mechanisms. And so as I was digging into trying to discern, am I with the right person? Should I stay or should I go? Nothing on the outside is actually wrong. Everything looks fine. Everything is fine. So why is it that I feel so off internally? The more that I began to dig into this, the more that I began to kind of invest into figuring this out for myself. I was doing coaching. I was working with a really incredible relationship coach. I was working with a relationship school as well. I was studying under them. And I was just trying to understand. And what I found is almost like it was a combination of two things. One, I was self-sabotaging. Absolutely. I was self-sabotaging. And there were certain things that I did that were not serving me. And those were like big nuggets of like, these are areas that I need to work on. These are like core wounding patterns and programming that is not only responsible for the anorexia that I had, but is also responsible for a lot of the high achieving mentality that I have, but is also responsible for like why I'm feeling so anxious in this relationship and why I'm having such a hard time, why I'm like overthinking, why I'm questioning everything, why I'm like ruminating, why I keep comparing myself to other couples, why I keep feeling torn of should I stay or should I go and not really knowing what to do, why I have, like many panic attacks. So there was that going on. And at the same time, the relationship itself was also not right for me. And so as I dug and dug and dug and really tried to figure this out, I got that clarity and I did end up leaving that relationship. And it was the hardest thing that I've ever done, hands down, harder than recovering from anorexia. That was hard in another way, harder than my parents' divorce. It was hard because it felt like everything that I had known and wanted and been striving for in my life, especially as a high achiever, right? That kind of white picket fence life, which I was so ready for, had collapsed, and it was fragmented. It had almost like imploded from within. And not only did I feel responsible for a lot of it, but which obviously I understand now, I wasn't responsible for all of it, of course, but there was so much shame that I felt, and shame and fear. And, I was in my early 30s. So I was like, oh my goodness, how on earth am I possibly going to have a kids and family now? Because the timeline, this isn't going to work out. I'm probably going to die alone. And it was awful. It was such a difficult time of my life. And the first 3 months after I called it all off were pure hell, obviously. There was a lot of survival there. But there was also one really incredible thing, and that was that I trained to be a mindfulness teacher. And I'd already been planning to do that before I broke it off with him. But it was almost like a saving grace because it meant that I had these 3 months of just deep introspection and deep meditation and really sitting with my feelings and processing them and getting radically honest with myself. And as I was doing that, and I had a couple months of rebounding, as I think we all do, I then decided enough's enough. I'm going to take this work really, really seriously. And all of those core wounds and core programming and all the stuff that I picked up upon, I'm going to clear it. I'm going to get rid of it because I don't want to ever be in this situation again. And even if I die alone, I would much rather die alone being happy, full of self-love, confident and clear in who I am, getting my needs met, than in the wrong relationship or, struggling or feeling sad or gaslighting myself ever again. And so I went hard. I was lucky that I was working for a big coaching company, a global coaching company out of London at the time. I had a lot of resources. I had a lot of access to coaching and I used it. I honestly used it. At one point, I think I had like 5 coaches. And I went so deep into the psychology of it. I went so deep into the science of it. I just became a hermit in my, at the time I was like in a penthouse in Kensington, which sounds lovely, but there were mice in there. So, don't get any ideas. But, I was privileged to have this access to all of the support. And I was digging deep into it. And I was working with my relationship coach and I was really like hunkering down, trying to figure out. And I did figure it out. It wasn't actually it was hard, but once I kind of grasped the science, the behavioral science of it, and I call it the behavioral science of attraction, and I kind of began to move through this process, I met my husband within 11 months of actually calling off that first engagement, which was way faster than anything I could have ever imagined because I thought I'd be single for like 5 to 10 years after calling off that relationship. So that was completely unexpected. And yet when I look back now in retrospect, I'm like, but of course I did. Of course I did. I took all the steps. I did all the work. And I wasn't just doing the work from a kind of academic intellectual perspective like I was doing before, right? When I look back at my 20s and all that therapy, all that talking, all that CBT, all that EMDR, all of this talk, it wasn't really landing. It was still rational and intellectual and logical, but it wasn't actually landing into my nervous system. It wasn't landing into my core wounds. Those were still firing off, which is why I ended up in that incorrect relationship, why I ended up engaged to the wrong person. It was only when I really began to embody everything that I knew on an intellectual level and really embody on a somatic level, neck down, that the changes really began to take effect. And only when I got rid of my core wounds on a deep unconscious mind, somatic, fully visceral level, that things really transformed me. And so that's kind of when I began to realize, like, okay, there are two things here. You can know all this stuff, you can understand all this stuff, and sure, I embodied it with the anorexia. But when it comes to relational work, it was all theory to me until I really began to put it into practice and embody it and live it, right? And that's when everything changed. And so shortly after that, I began executive coaching. And I began executive coaching. I did my ICF and started coaching founders and executives. And I began to see the same thing. I began to see the same pattern of people who are very smart, very successful, can achieve anything that they want to achieve in their life. Go-getters, traveling, living on a plane, building companies, being expats, all these amazing things. But their love life and the relationships are just fraught. They're areas where it's either feeling lonely within the relationship, full of doubt. Should I stay or should I go? Am I with the right person? Can I do better? Have I outgrown him? Is it me or is it them? Am I self-sabotaging? Or they're single. And it's this case of like, I hate going on dates. I hate dating apps. I can't find anyone who seems to be on my level. It does feel lonely. I feel anxious and I don't know how to find the person. And I don't want to die alone. And that's really what made me decide to pivot and specialize in relationships and go harder on my own training, on my own education in the space. And I specialized in attachment theory and start, building this program. And the program that I built is really built on the back of everything that I did and the most successful tools and techniques that I learned and I applied and what I was teaching my one-on-one clients for years, and then kind of built into this system, into this program, into this methodology, which I call the Successfully in Love method. And it's really about helping people go through the steps that we all need to go through if we want to become healthy, securely attached, and have that healthy love that we are craving, that we deserve, but we don't always know how to get. And so with that being said, that is my introduction to you. I hope you tune in for more episodes where I'll be talking more about attachment theory. I'll be answering questions. I'll be talking to different industry experts, other industry experts, and really just diving into everything to do with relationships, with your love life, and helping unpack what otherwise feels like a bit of a mysterious, enigmatic thing into more kind of, I guess, logical, scientific terms without losing the edge of what it is to be in a healthy, happy relationship, right? Because we can't rationalize and logic our way into it, but we can apply a logical, scientific container to give us the space and the structure to embody everything that it is, everything that is actually wonderful and mysterious in love. I hope that makes sense. Anyhow, but I will be catching you in a couple of weeks and sending lots of love from me to you. Take care, everyone.